When she was home from her boarding school, I used to see her almost every day sometimes, because their house was right opposite the town hall annex. She and her younger sister used to go in and out a lot, often with young men, which of course I didn't like. When I had a free moment from the files and ledgers, I stood by the window and used to look down over the road over the frosting, and sometimes I'd see her. In the evening, I marked it in my observations diary, at first with X, and then when I knew her name, with M. I saw her several times outside, too. I stood right behind her once in a queue at the public library down Crossfield Street. She didn't look once at me, but I watched the back of her head and her hair in a long pigtail. It was very pale, silky, like burnet cocoons, all in one pigtail coming down almost to her waist, sometimes in front, sometimes at the back, sometimes she wore it up. Only once, before she came to be my guest here, did I have the privilege to see her with it loose, and it took my breath away. It was so beautiful, like a mermaid. Another time, one Saturday off when I went up to the Natural History Museum, I came back on the same train. She sat 3 seats down and sideways to me and read a book, so I could watch her for 35 minutes. Seeing her always made me feel like I was catching a rarity, going up to it very careful, heart in mouth, as they say. A pale, clouded yellow, for instance. I always thought of her like that. I mean words like elusive and sporadic and very refined, not like the other ones, even the pretty ones, more for the real connoisseur. The year she was still at school, I didn't know who she was, only how her father was Dr. Gray, and some talk I overheard once at a bug section meeting about how her mother drank. I heard her mother speak once in a shop. She had a la-dee-da voice, and you could see she was the type to drink too much makeup, etc. Well, then there was the bit in the local paper about the scholarship she'd won and how clever she was, and her name as beautiful as herself, Miranda. So I knew she was up in London studying art. It really made a difference, that newspaper article. It seemed like we became more intimate, although of course we still did not know each other in the ordinary way. I can't say what it was. The very first time I saw her, I knew she was the only one. Of course, I'm not mad. I knew it was just a dream, and it always would have been if it hadn't been for the money. I used to have daydreams about her. I used to think of stories where I met her, did things she admired, married her and all that. Nothing nasty, that was never until what I'll explain later. She drew pictures, and I looked after my collection, in my dreams. It was always she loving me and my collection, drawing and colouring them, working together in a beautiful modern house in a big room with one of those huge glass windows, meetings there of the bug section, where instead of saying almost nothing in case I made mistakes, we were the popular host and hostess, she all pretty with her pale blonde hair and grey eyes, and of course the other men all green round the gills. The only times I didn't have nice dreams about her being when I saw her with a certain young man, a loud, noisy public school type who had a sports car. I stood beside him once in Barclays waiting to pay in, and I heard him say, "I'll have it in fivers," the joke being it was only a cheque for £10. They all behaved like that. Well, I saw her climb in his car sometimes, or them out together in the town in it, and those days I was very short with the others in the office, and I didn't used to mark the X in my entomological observations diary. All this was before she went to London. She dropped him then. Those were days I let myself have the bad dreams. She cried, or usually knelt. Once I let myself dream I hit her across the face, as I saw it done once by a chap in a teleplay. Perhaps that was when it all started. My father was killed driving. I was 2. That was in 1937. He was drunk, but Aunt Annie always said it was my mother that drove him to drink. They never told me what really happened, but she went off soon after and left me with Aunt Annie. She only wanted an easy time. My cousin Mabel once told me, when we were kids in a quarrel, she was a woman of the streets who went off with a foreigner. I was stupid. I went straight and asked Aunt Annie, and if there was any covering up to do, of course she did it. I don't care now. If she is still alive, I don't want to meet her. I've got no interest. Aunt Annie's always said good riddance in so many words, and I agree. So I was brought up by Aunt Annie and Uncle Dick with their daughter Mabel. Aunt Annie was my father's elder sister. Uncle Dick died when I was 15, that was 1950. We went up to Tring Reservoir to fish. As usual, I went off with my net and stuff. When I got hungry and came back to where I left him, there were a knot of people. I thought he'd caught a whopper, but he'd had a stroke. They got him home, but he never said another word or properly recognised any of us again. The days we spent together, not together exactly, because I always went off collecting and he'd sit by his rods, though we always had dinner together and the journey there and home, those days, after the ones I'm going to say about, are definitely the best I have ever had.